Mad Catholic is created by ordinary people with deep faith and lots of questions, so we all can unbox our faith. Now, here's your host, Kelly Worth, and today's special guest, Margaret Mary O'Connor.
Only a few years ago, I first heard of Catholic women priests. As a Catholic woman wrestling with my lifelong pastoral vocation, I spent many hours searching for information and inspiration about possible pathways. As it became clear to me that brave women had already forged a way ahead into Catholic diaconate and priesthood, I came to depend on their writings, blogs, podcasts, and media appearances. Those women who were bold enough to tell the truth became my inspiration and reassurance in following God's call. One such woman is our guest today. When I found her podcast titled Your Radical Truth, I was delighted by Margaret Mary O'Connor's tenacious truth telling. I immediately wrote to her to thank her for her work on behalf of renewal for the Catholic Church, both in women's leadership and in breaking open the secrets of the Catholic sex abuse scandal. She wrote back to me to encourage me in my own vocation. And when I started my podcast, she immediately made my guest wish list. Margaret Mary O'Connor has been called the modern day David on many occasions. On a mission to reveal carefully guarded secrets of the Catholic Church, she unveils the truth through her well researched writings. Author of Scandal in the Shadows and Journey of a Celiac Soul, Margaret Mary is a force to be reckoned with. With a Bachelor of Science degree in Physical Education from the University of Buffalo and a Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry from Christ the King Seminary in East Aurora, New York, Margaret is a former chaplain and currently is a Eucharistic minister at Our Lady of Charity Parish in Buffalo, New York. She literally walks the walk on picket lines to help keep the issues of women's ordination and church accountability on the priest sexual abuse issue at the forefront of any Catholic's attention. As a member of the laity, she believes any Catholic deserves, at minimum, the truth from Rome, as opposed to the continual outright deception they are receiving. She is a member of Call to Action, Future Church, Roman Catholic Women Priests, Women's Ordination Conference, and SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, Buffalo Central Terminal, Preservation Buffalo Niagara, and Western New York Land Conservancy. Margaret Mary is the recipient of the Special Award for Achievement from the Dale Carnegie Public Speaking Course. She also enjoys gardening, Pilates, and reading mystery books. Welcome, Margaret.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited that you are now a deacon.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely to have you here. Only you and I know how blessed this meeting is after all of our previous attempts to schedule this podcast. We each had several events that derailed us before, but here we are.
Nothing was going to prevent this from happening.
Exactly. Your commitment to truth telling in the Catholic world is clear in your writing, podcasting, and in your actions. But to start off today, I have to ask you, what first lit your fire? What inspired you to take up this prophetic role in the church?
I think there were little steps previously when I was younger, but when I got to be about middle age, I had always had a curiosity of hearing that there were women priests within our Catholic Church. And yet I had asked the gazillion priests, no, never. I guess the curiosity did. It got the better of me, and I read, so many books. But it wasn't until I came across books dealing specifically with biblical research. And that's where you're going to find a treasure trove of information. And there was this one book, The Hidden History of
Yes.
Women in the Catholic Church. For years of Christianity, women were ordained. There was another book written by a former Catholic priest, John Vingegaard, The Ordination of Women in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And what was so unique about his book was he actually had a chapter on Mother Mary of God. And of course, that really piqued my curiosity. And when I got to that chapter, and he's stating emphatically that Mother Mary of God was a woman priest. They referred to her as Mary Priest. And of all titles to have, the title was the model for all priesthood in the Catholic Church. Well, I threw the book up in the air. I got so excited, but then immediately I gathered it together and I'm thinking, did I see what I saw? Did I read what I read? But then shortly after that, all that joy and excitement quickly dissipated because I had this awful realization that this is a centuries old scandal of omission regarding the factual truth of women previous positions in our early church, the early centuries of our church. And then, Kelly, isn't it ironic that this is the specific time period that the Catholic Church hierarchy will never recognize?
Yeah.
But if you're a listener out there and you're probably pretty shocked, and some individuals I've talked to said, now, wait a minute, maybe this is like an honorary title for Mary, obviously Jesus' mother. And John Vingegaard said, no, she was in fact a sacrificial priest, meaning that she was doing the consecration on the altar. And there was a funny painting going back to the 15th century, and it showed Mary in religious garb on the altar, kneeling down in front of her is a pope. And back then they had hats that they called tiara. And he had taken his tiara off, and right to the right of the tiara was this little angel with this mischievous grin on his face. So it was perfect. But again, this whole conception of Mary being a priest, why don't we know that today?
Yeah.
Why haven't we been told that? And why is it such an awful secret?
Yeah.
When you get into the history of the church,
Yeah.
then you'll see why that's needed
Right.
to be a secret.
Yeah.
But I personally come across it in my picketing, and it irks me because so many women just get so ballistic with me doing what I'm doing. And it's wonderful news, or I feel it should be wonderful news.
You would think that more women would celebrate the idea that Mary was priest and that women had these leadership and priestly roles. But it's been my experience too that there is real resistance to that idea among a lot of women. But the best thing is to get this evidence out so they can see there's a historical precedent. It's
Yes,
not been forbidden since the beginning.
because it's so sad. Why is the woman priest issue so contentious? It's because no one knows about it. But if I can just bring up two more points.
Please.
Way back, this is when I was a young girl, my mother had bought my brother Paul a church. It was a replica, a cardboard replica of a church altar. So Paul began to be the priest, and my twin sister Pat and myself, we were told to grab some chairs and sit like parishioners.
Right?
So there we were out in the parlor, and I remember everything was going all right until the point where I stood up. I said, Paul, I want to play the part of the priest. And then I was in shock because he said, no, you're girls.
Oh,
You have to be a man. So I learned very early that, wow, why is it that a boy can do this, but a girl can't do this? And then it was just a few weeks later, my mother was a church organist. And after choir practice, because she knew once Paul left playing the part of the priest, my twin sister Pat and myself, we would change and we would be the priest, play that part. So she said, "Would you girls like to go down and stand behind the church altar?"
Really?
Well, I mean, let's face it, in the 1950s, there were no women up on that altar. So my sister Pat, she had her chance. And I'm just about getting centered behind the altar, and I had this crazy thought of, gee, on the weekends, this place is packed. This must be neat standing
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, this gruff voice, what are those girls standing behind the altar? What are they doing? And I was like in shock.
Yeah,
The Monsignor was my mom's boss, and I'm getting all nervous for my mother. Oh my God,
right?
she's done something wonderful for us.
Yeah.
She's gonna get in trouble. And my mother usually didn't rock the boat, but she said right back to him, she said, "Yes, Father, you're right. But women are allowed on the altar to clean the altar." His face got feet red, and thankfully he turned around and left the church. So
Wow.
then I went back up, but it just took away from that
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
And it just the nerve of him.
yeah.
We're two young girls. What and then what are we doing? And then again, I'm going through my mind, well, can't be preached. We can't even stand on the
Yeah,
altar. You get thoughts like that.
yeah.
And then I got older and got into these biblical research books. Oh, it's a sad tale indeed, and it shouldn't be that way. But as you said, the only way is for Catholic women all across the US, across the world, to understand this other side, this wonderful other story of our Catholic Church's history.
Yes, I'm not as up on the history as you are, but I do understand that there's been a discrediting of any evidence that people come forward with. And I
Mm,
think that's why I was so fascinated before our meeting here. And I'm just going to run through quickly, just so people can see representations of Mary from 300 AD up into about 1500. And as I understand it, about 1500 was when the hierarchy really cracked down on female or images of Mary, that she began to be portrayed as much more passive and domesticated. This is a painting by Ingres. And I have this one hanging in my living room because it inspires me.
mm,
But I'm going to move this one in. We'll get into some older things. And this is actually from a catacomb
oh,
mosaic. And
no.
here is Mary. The Oran's position, where she has her arms up, was definitely a priestly pose.
Mhm.
So I found that one interesting. And then here she is again. And this one is a little more explicit, because she not only has her hands raised as a priest would, but she's also wearing this ecclesial cloth, the Eucharistic cloth at her belt, which was
Mhm.
considered a priestly vestment. And you see that in a number of these pictures. Here she has it on her belt as well as she's holding the
Yeah.
child Jesus. So I think it's good for us as women to see that this is depicted in art, and it's not just an honorific. This is how she was seen. And again, it's very small on this picture, but you can see she still has that Eucharistic belt. And then this one I like because she's in full, almost
Yes.
bishop regalia here. And there are some indications in some art that she was even seen as having the stature of a bishop. Again, here you can see the vestment peeking out from underneath what almost looks like a chasuble. She has the
Mm.
what we would now call the stole. And again, here you can see the stole peeking out from underneath her robe. So
Oh,
I
wow.
just found it interesting that there was so much of it, really. And here she's again in that prayer, hands upraised position with the vestment of the priest.
Oh, that's the same picture that's on the cover of my book.
All right. Okay. That's a good segue then. Awesome.
Three.
Yep. That's the one.
Yeah.
It's important to see these images, just as it was life changing for me to actually
Mhm.
see a woman at the altar. Because as you, as a little girl, were experiencing, when you don't see it, You can't imagine it. You can't imagine yourself in that role.
That's right. And we had no role models. We had no idea, obviously, that Mary was a woman priest.
Right.
And yesterday was Mary of Magdalene
Yes.
feast day.
Yes.
And yet, for centuries, let's face it, there was the wrong story about her.
Yes. Yes.
And considering God gave her that commission,
The first
I mean,
apostle. And I think I try not to say too much ascribing motives to why these things were suppressed. I don't know that it even needs to be said that so much that goes on is about power, but
mhm.
it's so deeply damaging, and this is one of the things I end up talking about with a lot of my guests is the psychological harm to women. First of all, not seeing themselves represented at the altar, but then also the rhetoric, the arguments. In one of your recent interviews with Adina Meyer, who's newly ordained as a woman priest now,
Oh, yes.
I listened to that interview, which is great. And the argument of the church is that women's bodies are, quote, invalid matter, end quote. And
I mean, how demeaning.
I felt ill when I heard that. I think I'd probably heard it before, but just hearing those words, I thought how abusive that is.
Can I read a short quote?
Please.
This John Vingegaard's another book, What They Don't Teach You in Catholic College, Woman in the Priesthood and the Mind of Christ. But the heading is Warped Views of Woman, held by Thomas Aquinas
Mhm.
and Bonaventure. And of course, these were fathers of the church.
Yeah.
And getting back to this idea of a woman's body, a female is deficient and unintentionally caused. For the active power of the semen always seeks to produce a thing completely like itself, something male. So if a female is produced, this must be because the semen is weak or the material provided by the female parent is unsuitable. And then this was a real scientific fact. Or because the action of some external factors, such as the winds from the south, which make the atmosphere humid. But
Mm.
women are still useful, of course. In the overall scheme, they serve the purpose of being the fertile fields in which the man can sow their seed. Men thought basically, God forgive me, that it was them that they had the biggest role in producing a child.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but with that thing with the winds and the humid, it's total absurdity,
And
and we can laugh like things way back from the dark ages, but when you have that same projection of woman today as being unequal, not in the image of God, then I mean,
yeah. And that our bodies are materially invalid. I think that's the saddest thing because everything then flows from that. Their decisions about whether we will be at the altar or not. I'm sure it still goes back to that.
yes,
They can say that it's complementarity or they can explain it away that we have a special vocation as wives and mothers, but it's still exclusionary and it's still really derogatory to tell us that it's because of our physical bodies that we cannot be in the image of our Lord Christ, even though we are baptized in the same baptism. And even the Apostle Paul said there is no distinction.
and how can the church hierarchy ignore Genesis? In the divine image, God made them
Yeah.
female and male.
Yeah.
God created them. We are in his image.
Yes, we are.
And how do they have that discretion to completely ignore that?
It's beyond me to explain. This is why I don't talk about the whys very much because it seems impossible to justify. But maybe I'll have to have a male priest on here sometime to give me his point of view. And then I'll have to exercise discretion not to mute him. When I first heard of your book, I thought you were talking about the sex abuse scandal, but you're actually talking about the scandal about womanhood, aren't you?
Yes, and it's so interesting. And what would our hierarchy do if they didn't have the word scandal? Everything is a scandal.
Well, I'm a
Yeah.
scandal
Mm.
now because I attempted ordination. That's what they would
Well,
say about me, not that I'm ordained, but that I attempted ordination. And now I'm a
how
scandal to the church. In fact, they say about women being ordained that we are worse than the pedophiles.
yes, that was awful when they came out with that. And yet, these women that wanna be ordained, where is that call coming from?
Yeah,
It's not coming from the church hierarchy. Obviously, it's coming from God, from Jesus.
yeah,
So how, in my mind, the hierarchy that
yeah,
in their man-made laws that anyone tried to become a woman priest would be committing sin.
yeah.
This call is from Jesus, and how can you go wrong with that?
The term prophetic obedience was shared with me early on in my journey, and it proves true that you have to decide whom you will obey. I haven't had to pay dearly for it as yet, but I still approached it with some caution because it's a big decision.
Certainly. Oh, yes. I wanted to back to the book chapter on Mary.
Yes.
Back in 1903, Pope Leo XIII received a painting of Mary in priestly garb, and he was able to hang it up on the wall. By 1913, you can see things are changing. The church doesn't want anyone to give any sort of attention to Mary priests, and you couldn't hang the paintings anymore.
Mhm.
And then we move ahead to 1927, and all of a sudden, the church fathers decided they're going to remove the title from Mary, being the model for all priesthood in the Catholic Church. And John Vinsgard said, wait a minute, why that year? Lo and behold, there were women from all other church denominations that had begun the previous year voicing that they as well wanted to become woman priests.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church thought anything with Mary as a priest, we have to hide that. But I thought, don't these men have any fear? How could he take Jesus' mother's title away from her? But even worse than that was there was a little article that ran in one of the world newspapers. And some Vatican official was talking to this newspaper man. And he said, isn't it well that you answered this question the way you did, taking Mary's title away from her? And isn't it well that this question be put to sleep? You're talking about Mary, Mother of God, as an object, as a question in 1927.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, no one here never heard anything about this little article about their scandal of taking away Mary's title. Something that's very important that many listeners have never heard is 1976.
Mhm.
The Pope has his own commission, and the Biblical Pontifical Commission was looking into women becoming priests.
Mhm.
Their report emphatically said there is no biblical reason to prevent women from becoming priests. Hello,
Yeah.
1976, and we're at 2024, going back from Jesus' own words in the Bible that we are made in the image of God. And now we have this report coming that there's no biblical reason to prevent women from being ordained. That's being ignored as well. In 1974, there was an International Theological Commission, and they were looking into the
Mhm.
study of women as deaconesses.
Mhm.
And basically, they came out with 3 Greek studies that were all in agreement. Both women and men were on the altar in front of a bishop. The bishop was praying over them. He placed his hands on them,
Yeah.
and they had a stole to put around their neck, and they received the chalice to drink from, and the women were called deaconesses. Well, then why in 2016 did Pope Francis have to convene this new commission?
Yeah.
Again, they just completely ignore this. And finally,
Yeah.
from Vatican II and the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Article 29 basically came out in so many words. And they said We want to eliminate all prejudice, whether it be racial, whether it be sexual. Well, we obviously know that wasn't revisited.
Right.
They just have a way of totally ignoring everything that is of key importance to any woman in the church. And I want the listeners to know, is this right? And why does it go on? It goes on because the church is in the driver's seat.
Mm,
They came out with that statement, women were never priests. So they haven't been hounded by the media
mm.
and they go on their merry way. And why is it right for us as women? Obviously, we make up half of the church that we never knew that they'd been lying to us. This is just the incomprehension, right?
It is. It is. I recommend that people read your book, and Vingard's book is very good as well. I think anything that you can read that brings out this evidence is going to help you realize that for whatever reason, you've not been getting the truth about women's roles in the past. In fact, they've gone so far as to say, well, it's never been, so it can never be. We need to inform ourselves and each other. And that's why I'm so glad to have you here today to talk with us
Oh,
about all this.
gee.
And now we've gone through this whole synodal process and led to believe that this was actually being considered, and now it's off the table again. I'm not
Yeah,
surprised. I'm not surprised, but I'm disgusted.
that convenient.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
It seems like there's this ingrown fear against women. They just don't want to share anything. And the perfect example is, unfortunately, the awful hemorrhaging, the shortage of priests. They knew back in the 1970s, Kelly, they started to do surveys and they could see that not as many priests were going into the seminary.
yeah.
What did they do? Nothing. We get into the 80s, nothing. The 90s, and finally, of all things to affect the liturgy of the Eucharist, they came out with this communion service.
Mhm.
This whole thing is their fault in the sense that if they would allow women to be priests, it would begin to help shore up this awful loss of priests. They could bring back former married priests to
Mhm.
help on the
Mhm.
weekend.
Mhm.
There's so many other avenues. There's even a canon law, and the number
Yeah.
escapes me, but it specifically says only the caveat is there has to be a shortage of priests.
Mhm.
A local bishop can choose either a deacon or a lay person
Mhm.
to take care of
Mhm.
a parish so it wouldn't have to close.
There are many parishes where women are doing all of the work to keep the church open. They're just denied that role at the altar that the priest has. They're doing everything else administratively and pastorally, going to visit people. But they functionally are deacons. The last Roman mass I attended before I became ordained uh, was on priest vocation Sunday, and they were bemoaning the lack of vocations. And I was sitting there. It took everything in my power not to go. And then they also announced that same Sunday that they were closing parishes in the diocese and they were pulling priests to redistribute them to other places. So there were fewer priests per parish. And it was just sad. It's very sad.
Oh, it is, and that must have been awful for you of all days.
I was struck with the absurdity of it mostly. I was sad, but I was also grateful for my own vocation and for the path forward because someone is going to need to take care of the people.
Oh, definitely, and it's ironic, I pick it with the call to action specifically on that day, and unfortunately, this lady came out of her car, and I always say, if you wanna get the pulse on a subject, just grab a picket sign.
Yes.
You'll find out very quickly. I could just tell by her body language that she wasn't too pleased I was there, so I said, "Good morning." You should be ashamed of yourself. These two men are being married to Christ through priesthood.
Mhm.
And this is just so awful,
Yeah.
disheartening. And I said, it really is disheartening that we're not going to see any woman today in this procession. We're not going to see any woman following in the footsteps of Mother Mary or any of the other woman priests. And she looked at me and, oh, she said this so condescending. I have a doctorate in theology. You don't know what you're talking about. And women's ordination, and that's another wonderful Catholic organization.
Yes.
They came out a few years ago and they showed four religious figures from the past. Sophia, a deacon, Mary Magdala, and there was like four different people.
Mhm.
And it would say, "Where are they? What happened to?" And it would give a history of them, and they had really nice colored pictures.
Yeah.
So I have that as my sign when I pick it.
Good.
On that day, I said, "Have you ever read in your doctoral studies books regarding biblical research?" And it ended for a second, and, she said, "What am I?" I said, "Here's the proof."
Yeah.
And she turned back at me, and she said, "You're not a real Catholic. You're lying."
Yeah.
And then she just turned around in a huff and she went into
Yeah.
the car.
Yeah.
And I thought there was just no way of reasoning with her. She was using her doctorate of theology card against me. And as well, when I'm picketing, whether it's for priest abuse or the woman's ordination, people will say, "Could you tell me where in the Bible
Mhm.
is this information?" And it's not in the Bible, it's in biblical research.
Uh,
Well, if I don't have the Bible card, forget it.
which
And
is
it's
really very Protestant of them. I mean, interestingly, to pull that word alone thing out when
yes,
actually being Catholic, we don't stand just on the Bible. We stand on tradition as well. So that's ironic, isn't it?
but I see it as a learning
Yeah.
experience. I really feel good when not a whole bunch of people, but some people do come up afterwards. And sadly, mainly it's older people because the younger people are gone.
Yeah. I know we talk about that a lot in our church. I don't know how you convince people that something is relevant when they've decided it's not relevant to them. It's a challenge. We need the Holy Spirit for that one.
Definitely, and it's the millennial woman. They've done studies that are the largest group of younger Catholics that are leaving the church.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? That obviously means there goes your church.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have young women there that are going to your church, you're not going to have children becoming future Catholics. But I think with the younger group, I think that might be the real thing to bring them back to the Catholic Church if the Catholic Church would allow for women priests.
Oh, I
Because
yeah.
what their main contention is they're tired of this hypocrisy. They're tired of being like a second-rated citizen, which is the truth,
Mhm.
in their own church.
Oh, absolutely. I know that women in my daughter's generation, they're just not going to tolerate not having a voice in leadership or even in representation, and I think they look at the Roman Catholic Church and they're puzzled. What century is this? So you're right. The young people are not going to stand for it. The Roman Catholic women priests, ARCWP, the church that I'm part of,
Mhm.
Catholic Church in Exile, we're very intentional about the laity being on equal footing with the leadership. And that's another aspect of this problem is that the patriarchy hierarchy structure does not give a voice, equal voice to the people.
And yet they can say in their homilies that everyone, we are the people,
Yeah.
the laity is the people of God.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, no offense, now they sound like pie in the sky words because
Yeah.
let's face it, that isn't happening. And I remember back to Vatican II. That was such a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And of course, Pope John the 23rd said we need to open the windows of the church to
Yeah.
see or hear the signs of the times. And today, the Latin Mass is beautiful. I remember the Latin Mass.
Mhm.
But when the Catholic Church brought out Vatican II, I'm not trying to be smart about this. They should have had some type of a better PR on it because
Yeah.
so much was lost.
Mm.
At that time, of course, the Mass was said in Latin. And so many of the Catholics, "Well, you're taking away our Latin. Why are you—" And they didn't understand the whole purpose of changing, revising the liturgy of the Eucharist was to go back the closest that they could as how the early Christians celebrated the Mass.
Mhm.
And of course, our missals would have English there too. I just found it so wonderful, just instead of seeing the priest back, they had the
Mhm.
priest turn around, and it was more personal. And unfortunately, the Latin Mass actually was in the 16th century where there was my priest called it this high Christology.
Yeah.
And there's just this division today between celebrating the Mass from the 16th century or celebrating the Mass as it was the closest to when Jesus was
Yeah.
alive. And there's just this dissension. I can't believe it, but it's tearing down our church.
It is. I think I'm also agreeing with you when I say that we can't be fighting about these things. We need to be looking for ways to come together as the laity, uh, eh, because the division works for the patriarchy. When we're fighting about how are we going to have the mass, we're not addressing the real issues about who gets a say and who gets to participate and who gets to lead, which are really important questions.
And
And I think if we could straighten that out, if we could have people of all identities and genders having access and a voice, a lot of these other things would work themselves out. We could have more peace.
yeah, because it's like on the picket line, you're trying to help them see another side,
Yeah.
but they're stuck. It's like ironclad.
Yeah.
My hierarchy told me this. And again, it works perfect for the hierarchy because you have all these Catholics out there that are sticking up for
There's
oh,
a real fear base too, to a lot of the theology that was given to previous generations. And even to some extent now, people are afraid to consider things that they've been told not to talk about because they don't want to go to hell and they don't want to be in trouble with the priest. And that's another thing that I don't think the young people are so concerned about anymore.
the first time I ever picketed, it was like we were Martians. Seriously, they didn't know what to think. It
Oh,
was their first introduction, but many of them walk by us and they just shake their head and they tell us that if you don't love this church, then get out. Go 2 blocks over to that church.
yeah.
And then I'm being polite, but I hear very disparaging words.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That they really let you know, unfortunately, what they think. But again, what's all lost in this is this chance for them to see another side of the church,
Yeah.
which actually it's hidden in the shadows of the church. It's right there.
Yeah.
But until the hierarchy will come out and open up this history, that's what I wanted to get back to. I really think the Catholic laity have to make the hierarchy accountable. Just sending them a postcard asking them why, if your commission said there's no biblical reason to ordain woman, why hasn't that happened? If there would be millions of Catholics all across the US, worldwide, can you imagine?
Yeah.
That would get their attention.
Yeah.
But they have no one that is exerting, and that's awful to think that with your church hierarchy, you have to exert power,
Yeah.
but your presence has to be equal with theirs, or nothing is going to change. And it's shown they won't change.
They have no
because
reason to. They have unchallenged, they can just go on doing things the way they like. I know that last mass that I attended that I mentioned earlier, they that was also where they announced the closing of parishes. The focus of the homily was how the church was going to be smaller but stronger.
you just wonder what PR people they yeah, for these terms.
Again, I was just puzzled. I was like, "Wait a minute, that you're talking about people here. You're talking about lost sheep, people who are not being served, and you're gonna tell yourself that the church is stronger now with fewer people in it." So,
Yeah, they get these different catchwords.
yeah,
Oh, how creative.
yeah.
Well,
So
this one situation in our church, they're going to close about in Buffalo about 80 churches, parishes. And this one in particular is really sad because this priest himself had cancer and then he beat cancer. And with his own money, he built this little chapel next to the house. And it's wonderful because there's a medical corridor in Buffalo where you have about 3, 4 different hospitals. So people can walk down there and get to that chapel.
mhm.
And of all places to close, that's on the chopping block because that's, oh, right in the medical corridor, that's big money.
Yeah.
So, now listen, nothing all's not lost. We are going to move this to St. Joseph's Cathedral that's a long distance away. If you're coming from out of town, you'd have to hire a taxi, whatever, to get over there. And that church itself as well is going to be closed.
Mm.
This is just pure insanity.
There is great need for the laity to be weighing in on these decisions that affect their own parishes.
Well, supposedly they have a process that right now, so many of the parishes are making their voice known. I don't know, through something written maybe, but it's all strictly money, money, money. And I know in this age we need money, but we'd never be in this situation if the hierarchy of Buffalo would have years ago stopped the awful sexual abuse. Like right now, there's 900 victims.
Oh my
Why didn't some priest years ago, any bishop,
god.
finally stand up and say, look it, we can't cover this up. We need to stop this here and now. That's the thing also that's so disheartening.
One thing that struck me as I was watching an ordination service for Roman Catholic male priests is the specific vow that they take to submit to and obey the hierarchy. So I think it's built in that they cannot necessarily act on conscience. Theologically, yes, we Catholics are told that conscience is above everything, but when a priest has to stand in front of his bishop and vow to absolutely obey his bishop in everything, to be ordained, kind of sets up a bad situation.
It certainly does.
So,
And I think of that former priest, Rory Bourgeois.
oh, I love him.
What? No, and what he did for women around the
Oh,
country, openly come out like that, and then we know what happened to him.
right? He's a saint.
And
He's a
that
saint.
he's speaking the truth.
He is. And he lost everything for it. Lost his pension, lost his function as a priest. It's terrible. The men who stand up for us as women truly are remarkable because they do pay the heaviest price.
And yet they're lumped in with everyone else that speaks up.
Yeah. Did you ever consider did you want to become a priest yourself?
I think when I was younger,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. You've certainly found your prophetic role, and I know that I and other women on that path are so grateful. You mentioned the 1970s. I have chatted with different women religious in that period who were very hopeful that the path might open for them for priesthood at that time. And then when it did not, it was pretty devastating for them. So my heart goes out to women from that era because they had such a deep devotion and then were so disappointed after Vatican II. It's really tragic.
Because Vatican II was so striking, they
Yeah.
finally thought, here we go. Now we're finally on the right road.
And they saw the Episcopal women being ordained and other and Protestant women being ordained, and then there you are, left in the dust. It was a shame.
I'm just hoping the women that listen to your podcast, they're learning that if they wanna become a priest, there's no reason why they can't become a priest, and hopefully this will open the door for them that they won't be afraid to investigate, like, the independent Catholic churches where this is happening or even the Roman Catholic women priests.
Exactly.
There's a Celtic Catholic church,
Mhm.
and there's another one, Reverend, Stieringer. She really liked Saint Hildegard, and she has Hildegard Haus and
Yeah.
that devotion to Saint Hildegard. I went and saw her church,
Oh, did
really.
you? Yeah, I got to see it too. Isn't it amazing? Yes. Fairport Harbor, Ohio. If you haven't been there, people, you should go because it's a beautiful little destination. And as you're saying, Reverend Shannon's ministry is incredible. So you're right. But see, you did that for me because when I was starting to look into is this even possible, I found your podcast and it was so helpful to me because I could hear you talk about the history and I could hear other women who were ordained and it was an eye-opening, mind-opening experience that this is happening. So yes, we encourage women if you have a vocation, don't shut it down. Talk to other women. You can contact me. You can contact Margaret. We can put you in touch with other people. There are various avenues to explore. That's what you were saying, and I appreciate
Yeah, and that's what's so exciting
that.
because for years, let's face it, if you were in the Catholic Church, you knew that avenue was, completely shut down.
Right. And people will say, why don't you just become a Protestant? Well, the truth is, if you're Catholic, you're Catholic. You want to do it a certain way. You have the sacraments, you have all of this that is such a treasure to you. And I love my Protestant sisters who are ministers and the churches, but it's just different. So if you want to be Catholic, there are possibilities for you.
Now you know you really aren't doing anything wrong.
Right.
Women priests were in our history, and I know bringing them back today would, yes, it would be a change because we've never seen it.
Yeah.
But what did that mean?
Yeah.
Where is our religious heritage?
Yeah.
I happen to be Irish, so one generation, maybe Ryan was a priest, maybe John was a bishop, and Liam was a cardinal. But it was like in Irish families, they were so proud because it went from generation to generation. Okay, let's look over on this side of the aisle. There were women religious sisters, but where are the women priests? And there wasn't any role model by bringing back what was in our church's history. You're providing a role model for the young girls
Yeah.
in the Catholic Church, which I think would be wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what ministry God is really leading me into. I'm exploring that and we're developing some things. But sometimes I think, what if the only reason that I was called is it so that one little girl can look up at the front of the church and see a woman there? And that's good enough for me. If that's what it is, then that's worth it because that I didn't have and you didn't have. So
Yeah,
we need to provide that if we can.
yeah, and we need women that aren't only allowed on the altar just for cleaning. We need them up there otherwise.
I love your mom. I hope to meet her in heaven someday because that was some quick thinking on her part.
Oh, I know, that was and I remember it was probably was then in my 20s, and then you have thoughts come way back, and I said, "Man, how did you have the courage?" Because really, back then, you just didn't as a woman approach a monsignor about people and said, "Well, it just wasn't right that anyone was talking to my girls that way."
Just the fact that she encouraged you to go up there and stand there, that was really gutsy. That was great because she put a seed in your mind. I asked earlier in the discussion, what inspired you? And I'm thinking it might have been that moment. Your mother said, okay, I'm going to get this girl going.
And she's gonna shake things
That's
up.
awesome. I really appreciate that. Before the show, you mentioned that you had a terrible journey with a chronic illness in your life. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yes, Journey of a Celiac Soul, SOUL, Second Chance at Life. It's my journey living with an autoimmune disease undiagnosed for 20 years. And this disease, people unfortunately think of it as a fad diet. And the reason I want to let the listeners know that it's like lupus disease or any of the other major autoimmune diseases because it affects an individual's choice of food, whether it's your physical food for your body or the food for your spiritual being. And briefly, I'll explain that this doctor, Tom O'Brien, he said, envision in your intestine shag carpeting. Well, every time anyone eats any wheaten food, for some reason, our body attacks our intestinal wall. And after attacking it, the shag goes into Berber
Oh,
because the shag isn't able to absorb vitamin C, vitamin
yeah,
B12,
yeah.
proteins, whatever. And this diet that we're on, Dr. Alessio Fasano said, a celiac diet is like what insulin is to people with diabetes. And unless we stay on this diet, we will die,
Mhm.
but we will die slowly. People hear the word celiac disease, fad diet.
Oh,
It's not an autoimmune disease. You don't even have medicine for it. Well, that's right. Our celiac diet is our medicine.
yeah.
But what does the word diet mean? It means weight loss. No, we're
Oh,
trying to keep our
yeah.
weight on. And I can attest malabsorption, physical, physically starving is an
Mhm.
awful way to lose
Mm.
weight. And the little projections on your intestine are wiped completely away. So anything that you eat, it's not being absorbed. This is a diet where people have to really take it serious. We don't want your sympathy or your
Right,
pity, but we
right.
want to be able to go out to a restaurant and we want to be able to eat safely so that we don't get sick. So, beyond contending with the physical aspect of this disease, I needed some solace. So, I remember I went to my church and I was sitting in the pew, and all of a sudden I had this awful realization that the grain of wheat, the gluten in there, this protein that had affected my physical body anytime I would eat anything with wheat, followed me into the church, and now it was up on the altar
Mhm.
in the form of the wheaten communion host or in the chalice if when the priest does commingling and you happen to open that chalice to drink from. I was so lucky that I had a priest, a monsignor who read the medical information. He allowed me to put a pyx. It's a little metal container that holds the host. Put that on the altar with a gluten-free food for myself. That was going to be my communion. This went on for years. I had other wonderful pastors, very nice about this. But when an assistant came on,
Mm.
after giving me my case for 5 months, he tells me, "We have to go outside and talk." And basically, he's telling me I no longer can receive my gluten-free food. And I'm saying, "Why?" And he won't answer me. "Who's put you up to this?" And I really was getting upset. I
Yeah,
said, "Father, we have to end this before I say something I shouldn't."
yeah.
So, of course, back into the church, and I got the pyx off the altar. And that was that,
Mm.
but then I called him, and he called back on Tuesday, and I said, "Look at Father, we're going to go right to the point. Why aren't you allowing me to put my gluten-free food on the altar? That's my communion." I said, "You're gonna allow me to be swinging out here in the wind, not being able to get communion?" He said, "My conscience bothers me. I'm breaking church
Oh.
canon law." Well, I so mad. The dining room phone, I slammed down. It was an older phone. The receiver, the phone went.
Oh, now this was some time ago, but you were one of the first probably to really realize that unfortunately this sacramental food was not agreeing with your body and you needed something special.
Well, definitely. And there's a group of other ladies. We got so excited when they came out with the low gluten
Yeah.
house because we found this issue was taken care of. So I went to my Monsignor after what happened with the associate priest, and I said, back in the 50s, this would have never happened. You're the one that's in charge. What are you going to do
Mhm.
for me?
Mhm.
He didn't answer the question. He completely turned his back to me and he walked away. He left me up on the church altar. And I just had this feeling like I'm on the church altar. This is where the body of
Yeah.
Christ, this is where a
Yeah.
gazillion consecrations have taken place. This is the heart of our liturgy and the Eucharist. I never felt so
Um,
alone, just tired.
yeah.
So, what I'm trying to say is Rome thinks the communion issue has been taken care of, and no, it hasn't been taken care of completely. And I just want fellow Catholics to know there's the whole other side of women priests that's hidden in the shadow of the church. And now there's this other issue that um, Rome feels we have the low gluten host and taken care of, and it isn't.
So, what I hear you saying is that priests, which God willing, I will be one day, need to be open that the low gluten hosts are not adequate for people with severe celiac disease, and that we should be open to them providing their own acceptable matter for the Eucharist. Is saying,
Yes,
yeah,
I'm looking at it from the point of Jesus Christ.
yeah,
He healed the sick. Would
yeah,
he stand there and give you something that is going to harm you?
right,
Or would he make some type of an exception?
yeah.
So,
The rules are not the most important thing. It is love. It is love that we must always consider when we're caring for God's people. So thank you for sharing that story. I do have friends and family members with celiac disease, so I understand what you were saying, and I'm glad we could talk about it here. We're just about at time. If you would like to wrap up with a few more thoughts to lead us out for the day. I've so loved talking to you. This has been amazing. Your spirit shines so bright, and you really are a prophet for all of us. I'm honored to be able to thank you personally for what you did for me in my vocation. It's been great having you here, but if you would like to take us out.
yes, again, I'm speaking to the average, everyday Catholic. Why is it right that you don't know that Mary, Mother of God, was a woman priest? Why is it right that you don't realize that women were past deacons? Why don't you really know about this other side of your church's history? What would that personally mean to you? Would that perhaps give you a calling? Until the average everyday Catholic understands this wonderful truth, our church is going to be, unfortunately, right now it's crumbling. It won't be able to get back to where it was because by allowing women to be priests, it's just going to bring so much more vibrancy, so much more meaning back to the Catholic Church, and as well bring meaning to our younger generation, which so sadly is gone. And obviously, we know why they're gone. You have the power. So get out there and let your neighbors, your friends, let them know the true history of the Catholic Church.
Wonderful. And on that note, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon on Mad Catholic. Thank you. Bye bye.
Mad Catholic is sustained by the grace of God and the communion of saints. Say your prayers, kids, and until next time, give heartfelt thanks to God.